Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. Good financial news for the Trump administration. Inflation falls to 2.4% in March, but concerns continue, of course, that the tariff wars will result in higher prices, at least near term. China and the U.S. are locked in a battle over tariffs. My pick is that the U.S. wins this big time. And if the U.S. wins over China, the world wins over China. A broke China equals a safer world community. And now, add to the entertainment, Trump suddenly announced a 90-day delay in U.S. tariffs. The stock market surged on that announcement, but then crashed again the very next day. As always, we provide no stock advice on this show. Just hang in there and trust the financial professionals that you work with. Predictions are a recession and higher prices by the so-called experts. Hey, let's see what really happens. Another piece of good news was that the jobs number came out well above the predicted number. That's 228,000 jobs, well above the predicted number for March and much higher than February. The unemployment rate rose to 4.2% from 4.1% in February. This is still well below the 5% so-called full employment number, so no panic there. Good people, the university funding cuts that I am hearing about causes me heart palpitations. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled with the cuts. $1 billion in federal funds and grants to Cornell University and $790 million to Northwestern University have been frozen. The White House confirmed due to reported civil rights violations. This, of course, tracks well-publicized funding suspensions at Columbia and other woke schools, including fellow Ivies, Penn, and Brown. My question is, with the massive wealth that these colleges have, and of course they're tax-free, why is the federal government sending this kind of money to these schools? I can understand supporting HBCUs and small colleges and especially public schools. That's not what we're talking about here, folks. So I do have some real concerns about how this all got started in the first place, and I'm sure hoping that this is corrected. And I don't care if it's taken away because of DEI or woke or whatever it is. I think this needs to be taken away because they shouldn't need this money. It should go to needed public causes, including keeping Social Security and Medicare from going broke. The families of the October 7th victims in Israel sued Al Jazeera Network and its American affiliate Al Jazeera International for providing support to Hamas. The suit was filed in Washington, D.C., where Al Jazeera has an office. From my view, I have never understood why this clearly biased operation, reportedly funded out of Qatar, was ever considered a news source in the U.S. Even some Middle Eastern countries know that it is trouble. The suit names reporters who are believed to have been inside Hamas planning and therefore were able to provide reports of the horrors from that day very soon after the attack started. The hope is that a win in this case could cripple the U.S. operation, since despite concerns, it is still considered a news organization and not a foreign agent. Bidengate, it's just getting started. I like to support news outlets that give the slopstream media some competition. One of my recent go-to sources is the Washington Free Beacon, an email newsletter. They recently ran an article called "Outstanding Work, Doctor: How Jill Biden's Lust for Power Saved America." It was written by Andrew Stiles. It reports on a new book by a couple of insiders that blow the lid off the fabrication that Joe Biden was actually with the program, as we say. The book is Fight: Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. It takes a hard shot at Jill Biden, who is blamed for continuing to push demented Joe as a candidate for her own desire to enjoy the accoutrements of presidential office. I can see her side to it, but frankly, it appears to have morphed into elder abuse. The tilt to the reference book is that by pushing Joe as far as she did, by the time the early debate exposed Joe's failings to the world, it was too late for the Dems to run a real candidate. They dropped in Kamala the Weird, one of the worst candidates in recent memory. Particularly damning is this quote regarding the care it took the staff to cover up for Biden. Manage his calendar and his personal needs, which included almost daily sessions with a makeup artist to hide the physical signs of his age. As I've said before, Nancy Pelosi is older than Joe and the still greedy blank that she has been for years. Condition is the issue, not the actual age. I do not ascribe to the line about the running a better candidate. The fact is that the Dems are an ethically bankrupt operation and the public has figured it out. I don't think the Dems have a chance this past November due to the carnage they caused over the last 4+ years. Folks, check out some of the polls. 83%, 84% of Americans are standing for validation of voting and making sure that American citizens are the people voting. The Dems are polling at like 21%. It is time for the Dems to go away and to bring back at least something that resembled the original Democratic Party, because this is sure as heck not even an interesting operation. That doesn't mean the Republicans can let down their guard, because I remember when the Dems were on the floor and should have been trounced out, that Newt Gingrich and the batch of incompetent GOP folks back in the late 1990s let the Dems get back up on their feet. So let's not screw up twice in a row. Trump does not win at Scotas every time, contrary to many media reports. This is an oddball case that has garnered a lot of publicity. The background is that Armando Abrego Garcia, born in El Salvador, came to the United States illegally as a teenager, reportedly to escape gang violence at his home. Since 2019, he's lived outside Washington, D.C. with his wife, a U.S. citizen, and their 3 children, all of whom are also U.S. citizens. Immigration officials began efforts to deport Abrego Garcia in 2019. The issue is whether he was or is a member of the MS-13 gang. He lost the first round and was subject to deportation. The courts later granted him a reprieve. A piece of evidence was that the gang members in El Salvador continued to threaten and harass his family, and authorities in that country were and would be unable or unwilling to protect him from past or feared future persecution. Fast forward to March 2025, when ICE officers took Abrego Garcia into custody. He was sent to Texas and then to El Salvador's Terrorism Confinement Center. I agree with this for TDA and MS-13 gang members and others who have committed serious crimes, but I do agree with the judge in Maryland who ordered him to be brought back to the U.S. This case reminds me of the old cry wolf issue. If the loonies would only complain about someone with a legitimate case like this fellow, it might be easier to resolve this case. The vast majority of those shipped out are the worst of the worst. Why do we still have sanctuary cities and politicians arguing for the bad guys? It's a wrong approach. And let's settle this down and be more organized in getting rid of the bad guys. In any event, it initially looked like Scotas was going to rule for the Trump administration, but then changed its mind and ruled that Garcia needed to be brought back from El Salvador. As a fact, I believe he will be brought back in the next week or so. LA County will settle sex abuse claims for $4 billion. In a truly disturbing story and further evidence of the morally bankrupt mess formerly known as California, it is reported that due to years of abuse in juvenile facilities and foster homes, the county has agreed to pay out an incredible $4 billion. This is for 7,000 claims of abuse. The horror stories sound like every episode of Law and Order Special Victims Unit. Allegations of abuse, rape, and drugs, obviously. Equally troubling was that this went on for decades, and some of the alleged abusers were on the county payroll for years until very recently. I hope not a nickel of federal money is sent to bail out this rancid operation. It's time for California to fix itself. And when you see that the Californians are electing people like Newsom, like Adam Schiff, like Nancy Pelosi, they don't get the message, and they need to get the message that they need to get in line with Americans' moral values and business values. And until they do that, I don't want my tax dollars being corrupted over into California. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I am sure that you will agree that she deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Dr. Katherine Schein, who is a world-class scientist, and I'm proud to share with my Saving America audience that she is my sister. She earned her Bachelor of Science at the University of Pennsylvania with honors. She then earned her Master's in Bioengineering from MIT. She was offered a fellowship to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, where she earned her PhD in microbial technology. She then worked at a biotechnology leader, Biogen, in Switzerland. She created one of the first processes for something known as recombinant protein production, which means making proteins that were genetically cloned, working on alpha interferon and other cytokines. She later returned to academic research, researching allergies, working on useful vaccines, and determining what makes proteins toxic. This included such critical work as looking at chemicals that could prevent or reverse the aggregation of protein in Alzheimer's disease. She and her husband later moved to the United States, where they both worked at the University of Texas Medical Center at Galveston. She's a heavily cited author who continues to work on protein allergies and viruses. In the United States, we have a problem with not enough of our young people interested in math and the sciences. Dr. Schein has helped to bring an aspect of advanced medical science to the public with her new book, Conditionally Toxic Proteins. Now, before you change the channel, listen for a few minutes to help you see how connected we are all to this topic. We welcome Dr. Katherine Schein for her first appearance on Saving America. Most of us assume that protein is something all us humans need to survive. What is this about proteins being toxic?
Well, as I point out in the first chapter, just about anything can be toxic, but we've made a lot of advances in protein science in the last 50 years or so, and it's now possible to treat people with things called cytokines, which are small proteins produced by the body that have a lot of different activities. For example, interferon, which is, of course, my great love. It was my introduction to the field of protein chemistry. Before that, I'd mostly worked with a much larger protein called hemoglobin, which is the red in your red blood cells. So, and I have, when I started, I think you might remember this, my mother used to drive me to Norfolk General Hospital to the blood lab there for my senior thesis, which eventually won a Westinghouse Prize, a Virginia Westinghouse Prize. Of course, that prize has changed a lot in name over the years. I think it's now, I know it was at some point the Intel National Science Prize, but it's, anyway. But that, of course, was just for the state of Virginia. So I've always been interested in how proteins behave, and working at Biogen back in the very early days was, of course, very exciting because we got to make interferon. And at that time, there were very few chemotherapies. the chemotherapies we had, as I point out in the book, are basically protein toxins. So they are not protein toxins, but small molecules that work on proteins within the cell that eventually make it toxic for the cell to continue to exist. So it's very hard with anything that's a conditional toxin to know exactly who is going to be most grievously hurt by a toxin, or who it's going to help. So I think this paves the way for using botulinus toxin in things like cosmetics.
A classic toxic protein is Botox, which is a poison, correct? And it's now used for migraine headaches and in different ways to control tremors. How can something so bad be so good?
Well, you have to understand the mechanism of Botox, which is that it goes to nerve terminals. And so if you can control how Botox works, if you can control the basic toxicity and make it work locally, I think that the key here is that Botox has to work locally, which is why the cosmetologist takes a syringe and puts it into different areas in your face. I've never had it done, but I understand it works marvelously for getting rid of all those wrinkles. And that of course was the major use for a lot. That's what people know Botox for. And a lot of it's now Botox is the toxin that's produced if food spoils. So actually the name botulinus comes from the Latin word for sausage. So, and that was the original source of botulinus poisoning. And botulinus poisoning is all over the literature, actually, if you look at it. So it's why you shouldn't eat food from a can that's swollen, because we now have remarkable canning facilities. As I point out also in the book, it's kind of hard to kill yourself with botulinus toxin nowadays because we have such great control of it. That's rather facetious, of course. One of the factors of Clostridium botulinus, so the bacteria that produces the toxin originally, is that it makes spores. And the spores can exist for hundreds of years in the soil, as we know from other examples. So there's a disease in people who shear sheep that actually is due to botulinus toxin, where you get horrible looking black scars on great black scores on your arms. That's actually much less toxic than consuming the toxin. So when you eat anything that's contaminated with these spores, or when you feed a baby, for example, raw honey, which you shouldn't do, they get the toxin and it can penetrate the intestine and then go to your nervous system. And that's
wow.
Right. I think maybe the only current example that may be more painful than the death from botulinus toxin is tetanus toxin. It's very interesting because we can take the toxin, so the detoxified extracellular proteins of tetanus, of the tetanus bacteria, and use it as a vaccine. And,
yes, we do.
And the son, the son of what's his name, the president just before Calvin Coolidge. So Calvin Coolidge's son died of tetanus. And tetanus is an incredibly horrible disease. If you read the description of that disease back in the time, so when it was very common. So in the 1920s and the 1930s, we don't realize how common some of these microbial diseases were. For example, pertussis, which can choke a child to death. And children died of all kinds of strange diseases.
Well, it's interesting because regarding tetanus, all of us, even as adults, we're used to the childhood immunizations, the MMR and the polio vaccines
DTaP.
and all that. But DTaP. But it's interesting because even as adults, every 10 years, we're supposed to get a tetanus shot because of the protective nature of the detox.
You do not want to get tetanus. Let me put it that way. And of course, again,
Absolutely.
tetanus is produced by a microorganism that sporulates, so it can live in the soil. So
Yes.
there isn't any way really to avoid getting a tetanus
Exposed to it, right?
toxin, getting exposed to it. So it really is important to have immunity. So, uh,
Absolutely. Let me
yeah.
move on to my third question because I want to make sure we save some time for this question. And in scanning through your book, there's you've got something in there, the Blues Brothers Guide to Nutrition, and I just want to make sure we ask for that before we run out of time today.
Okay. Well, actually, I had a lot of fun writing that, of course. There used to be a department of food and nuts at MIT. Now, of course,
Hmm.
I somehow this department with time got to accumulate a whole lot of things like biochemical engineering, which of course was what I got my master's in. That was mostly affiliated with the departments of biology and chemical engineering. Anyway, but I did at that time attend lectures from people who were looking at clinical nutrition and the importance of certain vitamins. It may become as a shock to you, but even in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't clear. And even today, we're developing new answers for what vitamins we need to take. I mean, I don't
Yes.
think anybody was talking about acetyl-CoA way back in the 80s when I was a student. So anyway, the other lectures were on the basics, what people were beginning to discover about proteins. And I think the things that I'm most interested now, of course, are what makes an allergen. So this is one side of the immune system. On the other side, there is the question of, well, if this is an allergen, why is it that everybody can eat it? Why does everybody's immune system not react to allergenic proteins? Why I personally love peanut butter, and it was one of the staples of my diet when I was a graduate student. I used to live on peanut butter and jelly and peanut butter and Bacos and tomatoes and mayonnaise and lettuce on a sandwich. That was basically what I was living on, not having a whole lot of money. So this was while I was at MIT. So what I'm saying is I enjoy peanut butter, but as we know, we have a cousin Eric, and Eric will choke and potentially die
Yes.
if he's exposed to peanuts or even a related nut from walnut or cashew, as we learned to our great shock when he was a baby. And this allergy, one of the problems with allergies, and the reason why I wanted to take so much time in the book, the Blues Brothers was, by the way, a good way to sort of introduce the idea of you can get a protein, but it may not be the best protein for you. So, for example, in the Blues Brothers, the big tall drink of water wants a whole loaf of bread toasted, and that's all he wants for lunch. Whereas John Belushi's character is looking for looking for two whole chickens that he's going to apparently consume himself, which is just going to make him fat. On the other hand, the protein in the chicken is certainly going to be more balanced than the protein in the loaf of bread, even though
Yes.
that you can theoretically get enough protein from a loaf of bread. It's just not going to be very balanced. And
Yes.
so that gave me a way into explaining what's funny about gluten, because gluten is really a strange protein. Uh, and again, we can eat it. As I said, I was making those sandwiches on whole wheat bread at that time, probably. I hope
Which
I
is
was
high
using
in gluten.
bread. Yeah. And I love noodles. So I can eat noodles. I can eat peanut butter. And so can 90% of the population. So this makes a problem for people who do have sensitivity to some of these proteins. So peanut allergens or gluten in the case of celiac disease, because they should not, the only real treatment for either of these diseases right now is avoidance. And avoidance is awfully hard when everybody around you is eating croissants and beautifully smelling French bread and peanut butter, as I said. But you know, peanuts are in everything. If you go to a Thai restaurant, they're in the side of
Yes, they are.
your they're everywhere. And it's not just in what you can see. Peanut protein is used in a whole lot of other applications that you may or may not be aware of. It's somewhat less now, but defatted peanut protein is one of the staples of the food industry and has been for a long time. Now, Israelis say if you just feed children, I think it's called Bama, they're very addictive little protein. Well, they're covered with peanut flour, but they're actually corn puffs. So they're corn puffs that are coated with peanut flour instead of cheese. So they're also vegan. And again, I have to avoid these because I'm totally addicted to them. So every time I see a package, I have to say no, because it's really not the best food for me either, because it makes you gain weight, which was, of course, John Belushi's problem in the Blues Brothers. He's a little bit on the heavy side, let's put it that way. And so people who go on, for example, a diet where they only eat protein, I think it's called the caveman diet now. It had other names.
Yes, or the keto diet. Yes, so
yeah,
it's related
keto
to
diet,
that. Yes.
ketogenic diet. This can actually be quite deadly.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you really put yourself into ketosis, you're doing what diabetics have to avoid as well. So it may help you lose weight if you do it for a short time. You should probably not do it for a long time. Anyway, the chapter on the Blues Brothers was to kind of explain what the concept of how proteins are made up of amino acids and how certain amino acids have different properties than others. And for example, the amino acid proline, which occurs all over the place in glutens, is very difficult to digest because it's not one of the ones. So typical proteases in your stomach will take apart something after positively charged amino acids, but there are very few prolopeptidases. So there is now an industry to supply people who have celiac disease with a prolopeptidase, so a peptidase, a protease that will cleave after proline. But the problem with that is, well, how often do you need to take it? Because it's going to be, the prolopeptidase will be degraded in your stomach too. So it's a difficult problem to deal with. Again, until we have better solutions for how we control the proteins in our diet, the only way that people can manage these diseases right now is through avoidance, and avoidance is very hard.
But it's getting, but in fairness, it's getting better. I mean, I'm a big time food shopper because I'm a cook, and there are a lot of gluten-free options out there. I don't know how safe they are, but yes, you can get cauliflower crust pizza, for instance, which avoids the gluten
a lot
issue.
of these so-called cauliflower crust pizzas and so forth. One of the problems with going gluten-free is you're basically going protein-free, and if you look at, for example, buckwheat, you can try and get buckwheat noodles because they do contain less gluten. But if you look at the typical buckwheat noodle, it also contains wheat flour.
Yes, it does.
Well, just to hold it together. I mean, that's one of the advantages of wheat, that it's an amazing aggregation center for your bread and whatever else. So
I hear you. You can get more information about Dr. Schein's book, Conditionally Toxic Proteins, from the publisher, CRC Press, and of course, Amazon. The ICC loses more ground. The ICC is the International Criminal Court. It made headlines a few months ago when it announced plans to prosecute Israeli leaders and specifically Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The U.S. and Israel are not in the ICC, and recently Hungary will leave the discredited operation. I think this is again underscoring the fact that we sadly have some international organizations that have become incredibly corrupt and very obviously anti-Semitic and in many cases anti-American. The headline reads, "This ingredient in popular beverage is linked to cancer." That's scary. The story is especially bizarre because the drinks are supposed to be healthy beverages. The newsletter cites an article by the Daily Mail that the additive is inulin, a prebiotic fiber that helps feed healthy bacteria in the gut microbiomes by producing short-chain fatty acids, which can improve digestion by regulating bowel movements and preventing constipation. That's a quote. It is in popular drinks like Poppy and Olipop, which are promoted as being healthy alternatives to regular soda, maybe not so much. However, this additive may lead to digestive issues and cancer. They mention stomach cancer and colon cancer. The article notes that Pepsi acquired Poppy for $1.95 billion, maybe rethinking that after being sued for $5 million for claims that the drink is not really healthy stuff. On the other hand, there's been such a huge surge in consumption of such drinks over the last few years, you can see why Pepsi made the business decision. So I certainly hope this gets sorted out. And remember, many times we hear these reports of something being bad for you, and then later a different report comes out and says, well, maybe it wasn't that, it was something else. I don't drink any of these type of beverages, so I'm not super worried. Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. Two former football greats take their battle to the courts. Brett Favre, one of the most durable football quarterbacks in history, is primarily known for playing for over a decade with the Green Bay Packers, including a Super Bowl win. Sadly, he has recently announced that he is suffering from Parkinson's. Shannon Sharpe was the leading football tight end primarily with the Denver Broncos. He has 3 Super Bowl rings to his credit. So how did these two end up on the opposite side in a courtroom? In May 2023, according to a detailed report from ESPN, Mississippi native Favre was named as one of 38 defendants in a civil lawsuit alleging public fraud. The allegations are that $77 million in public funds designated for needy families were used improperly. Favre's attorneys have indicated that while some funds may have been used for projects that Favre supported, he had no personal knowledge that the funds were from that specific fund for needy families. He has not been criminally charged. The current case was a result of Sharpe's mentioning Favre and the scandal during one of his sports show broadcasts. Favre in turn sued Sharpe for defamation. The United States District Court for Southern District of Mississippi dismissed Favre's defamation suit in the pleadings. In an interesting interpretation, the trial court found that Sharpe's comments were, get this, rhetorical hyperbole and not actionable, as they were not accusing Favre directly of theft. This, of course, ended up in the appeals court. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reviewed all of the case de novo, meaning they reviewed the evidence again, not just taking the trial court's word for it. It also ruled in favor of Sharpe, but held that Sharpe's opinions were based on disclosed facts and therefore, again, not actionable as defamation. There is a famous legal cliche: in defamation cases, truth is a complete defense. This is a close call in this case, but that is how the appeals court saw it. An important court ruling for any family with health insurance issues. All too often today, I hear families having trouble getting health insurance coverage for medical issues, especially requiring long-term care. In Dwire versus United Healthcare Insurance Company, the insurer, Dwire, had a daughter with a serious issue with anorexia. The court ruling describes the circumstances. Because of her severe and worsening condition, Dwire brought the daughter to a residential treatment facility. When she was admitted at age 14, she was 5'2" and weighed only 75.8 pounds. She never felt hungry and did not want to eat at all. The healthcare professionals made some progress for her during the first few months. They deemed her 45 to 50% recovered. However, then United Health Insurance wanted to deny further in-facility coverage and have her moved to outpatient treatment. The medical professionals objected to this, but eventually they allowed her to have a 3-day weekend at home. The home visit turned into a disaster. Over the course of 3 days, she lost 2 pounds. She broke down crying on a shopping trip because of her terrible body image. When returned to the facility, she had regressed some, and the medical professionals continue to recommend continued inpatient care. Despite this trial run, United refused to cover any continued inpatient care and, in fact, only provided 50% coverage for the inpatient care that they did cover. Dwire went to court to recover the lost benefits. After a bench trial, which is a trial before a judge without a jury, the district court entered judgment for United. Fortunately for the family and perhaps other families, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed and ruled for Dwire. The appeals court ruled that United's denial of benefits was both substantively and procedurally deficient. Substantively, the court held that the United decisions was not supported by the evidence and contradicted the medical records. Procedurally, United failed to provide a meaningful dialogue or adequate explanation for its denial, thus violating ERISA, which stands for the Employee Retirement and Income Security Act of 1974. In addition, it found that United improperly failed to process claims at the regular rate, not the 50% rate that it applied. Unfortunately for the family, this was a 9-year ordeal to get this favorable ruling. Saving America welcomes Simon Heninson for his first appearance on Saving America. He is a senior research fellow in the Border Security Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. From 1999 to 2023, he was a Foreign Service officer serving in, get this list of countries, India, Fiji, Ghana, Slovakia, Togo, Washington, D.C., well, Washington's in there, Marseille, and Nairobi. Prior to entering the State Department, Heninson worked as a lawyer in London and then taught history, English, and drama at a private school in Miami. That's quite a background. Heninson holds a master's degree in modern history from St. Andrews, Scotland. I was there this summer. Beautiful place. Wow. And has a degree from the College of Law in London and a master's degree in international security affairs from the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. We've invited Simon to share some of his recent research on important security topics. So, and Simon, we're really happy to catch up with you here. We don't want to keep you from your keyboard too long, but as you know, we promised to ask only 3 questions. First one is, I read the article you wrote with Emma Waters, American Surrogates and Birthright Citizenship with Interest. What's happening here and how can it be corrected? And I know that this is in the news this week because of the, Trump putting his cabinet together and stuff.
Yeah, this is not such a high profile issue as compared to, say, birth tourism. But it really is a little worrying. It's one of those things, that is made possible by advancing technology. There's so many good things. Couples who want a child can have one when maybe 50 years ago they can't. But nothing, comes without problems. And there's always another side. So under the current interpretation of the 14th Amendment, which some of my colleagues here at Heritage and other legal scholars would argue is erroneous, that obviously was an amendment right after the Civil War to protect former slaves, Black Americans, from losing any of their rights. We wanted to make sure that they were protected. If they were born in the United States, their citizenship couldn't be taken away from them, et cetera. But obviously that was before jet planes and even steamships. So you didn't have the ease of travel that you have today. And we have had a phenomenon of birth tourism for many years. It used to be women from Mexico generally would sort of hop across the border to give birth. That way their child would be an American citizen, and then down the line could petition for them. So they called them anchor babies. Sometimes it was just because the hospital was better, and it wasn't always a negative or at least a self-interested reason. But that was the phenomenon for, let's say, the post-war period early on. But then in the past, say, 4 or 5 decades, we have seen women coming from all over the world, from China, from India, from Nigeria, from wherever. Anyone who has enough money could come to the United States, give birth, that child would become an American citizen, and it became sort of a status thing. And then you had companies setting up packages. You've got Chinese companies in California that will give a whole soup to nuts package for women from China. They can fly into the country, put them up in a nice hotel, go to Disneyland, shopping trips, massages, whatever, give birth, and whenever you're ready to go home, you go home with your newly minted American citizen child. Well, that child may have absolutely no connection to the United States. Their family may never pay taxes, may never be involved in the community or volunteer for, the military or the fire department or anything. But yet, for at least for that child, they're a citizen for life. It doesn't necessarily pass on to their children, but that's a sort of complicated citizenship law. And the problem with where it sort of collides with the IVF world is that technology is so good today that you can have a couple, say, could be two men, two women, a man and a woman of any age, whatever, arrange with an American or a person resident in America, a woman. I'm going to use the word woman. I hope that's okay with your audience, and I hope I don't need to define it, but
for sure.
So someone who is capable of conceiving and bearing children. So you could ship over sperm and an egg and have them assembled, in a donor, let's say a carrier woman. You could have a woman be inseminated with. I mean, there are all kinds of different possibilities. But the most, let's say, remote is that you could have a child born in the United States of foreign ingredients, foreign egg, foreign sperm. So neither parent is an American citizen or is even here in the United States. And this child is not related biologically to the mother and is born and becomes a U.S. citizen at birth, which I think would strike most people as weird, because
yes,
that clearly wasn't the intent of the 14th Amendment. And as my colleague who did a lot of research on this discovered, some states have rules about this kind of surrogacy arrangement. Other states have none. And so it's kind of cowboy country. And just like any other medical procedure, if there's no limits on it whatsoever, you will have a few bad actors who will exploit it. And it seems like a loophole that should be closed, at least to us, that it shouldn't be possible for two foreign nationals to conceive a foreign national child in the United States that then acquires all of the benefits of U.S. citizenship, but with absolutely no roots in the United States or even to an American.
Absolutely incredible. Staying on track here, your article, America's alarmingly high terror threat just keeps climbing the more we fling open our doors. And you highlight a very critical issue. What do you recommend for the incoming Trump administration to somehow reduce this terror threat? We've heard what Tom Homan proposes to do, but are there things local police could do, of course, if they're not pretending to be a sanctuary city?
Well, this is one of the easier questions to answer, because we simply need to flip back through the pages of time to about January 10th, 2020, and simply reinstate the policies that were working in that period to control the flow over the border. Now, I don't think there's ever been a time in the last century when the U.S.-Mexican border, let alone the U.S.-Canada border, was 100% sealed. Not a squirrel could get through. That's not ever the ambition. The ambition is to have control over the border so that we mostly know who's coming and we can mostly intercept dangerous individuals and drugs and so on. And in the last 4 years, it has been possible for criminals and terrorists to come in amidst the millions of people that are being paroled or released at the border. And you just have to do some basic math. It's not a question of every person coming to the United States being a criminal or a terrorist. Of course, that's not statistically likely. That's not the case. But if you look at the murder rate in the United States, it's about 5 in 100,000. In some countries, it's much higher. In Mexico, it's, I think, 25 in 100,000. So let's just take that as a baseline. If you have 100,000 people coming in, then it's conceivable 25 of them have criminal records for murder, right? Or will commit murder. And that within a given population of 1 million people in the United States, a certain percentage of them will have criminal records for everything from theft to assault to rape to murder. And the question is, who are those people? And in our normal immigrant visa system, where you're interviewing at a consulate overseas, I've probably done, 50,000 of those in my career, immigrant and non-immigrant tourist visas. For the immigrants, the ones who are coming permanently, they have to submit a police clearance from their home country. They have to submit a medical check. Now, could they lie? Could they? Yeah, they could. But it's much, much harder. They at least have to go to their local police and obtain some kind of document. and you have local staff there who speak the language. More than once, I've had my local staff come up to me and say, hey, that person you just interviewed, I remember seeing him in the newspaper last week. He's wanted in a corruption trial or whatever. And we would find out that people were no good. When they show up at the southern border, they are currently, and I hope this is put to a stop pretty soon, they are simply processed, meaning they take their fingerprints, ask them their name, say, show us your documents. They all very often say, oh, I don't have any documents because I threw them in the river on the way over. You go down there to the border, you will see piles of documents. They try to clean them up because it's embarrassing, but I picked up like a whole handful. I picked up residency cards from Peru, Turkey, all over the world that people had just dropped, including refugee cards from other countries where they were already given refugee status. Now, if you're a criminal or a terrorist, you might not want to go that route. You might not want to just show up and surrender to Border Patrol and wait till you get released, because there's always a slim chance that you would be in some U.S. database. Incredibly unlikely, but let's say you're an Afghan terrorist or you're a known whatever extremist from the Middle East. You might be in our system, Iraqi or whatever. So then you'd sneak in as a gotaway, and the estimates are at least 2 million people have been able to enter the United States without any observation or any encounter with an agent. So they haven't been, their name hasn't been recorded, they haven't been interviewed, they haven't been asked any questions. So you have to extrapolate. If we're catching, it's over a couple hundred, I think, at this point, people who were actually either surrendered to or caught by Border Patrol and found to have some kind of terrorist record in our watch list database. You have to assume that some of them came in and didn't surrender or get caught by Border Patrol. They're among those 2 million that got in. And, best case, these are guys who were, they're retired terrorists, and they've come here and they're just going to go and become, happy farmers and leave everybody alone. But there's always a possibility. To give you one example, there's the Afghan who came here. I don't know whether he was paroled or released at the border, but he was an illegal immigrant who was allowed in by this administration, knowingly, consciously, who planned a terrorist attack on the last election on November 5th. And fortunately, he was discovered beforehand and he didn't get away with it. But individuals like that have never had it easier in terms of entering the United States. And the odds of one of them sooner or later being able to do something that's going to hurt American citizens, I would say, is pretty high.
It's just an amazing and difficult situation, and I'm glad your article puts a fine point on it. The third article we're going to spend most of the time on, and this is a report you did with Aaron Schneidezan. Trendy Aragua is also a more convenient acronym. TDA is this terrorist gang from Venezuela. I am hearing some incredible reports, and it's just like a few months ago, all of a sudden we heard about some apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado, and now I'm hearing it's in 26 states have been identified. Tell our audience a little bit about TDA, what's going on, what does the Trump administration need to do basically on day one?
Well, this is I wrote a piece actually not quite a year ago, and I said in it, if you haven't heard of Trendy Aragua, you soon will. And those are pretty prophetic words, because at that point, I hadn't even heard of them. I was at a conference in Miami, and an expert on Trendy Aragua and crime in Latin America, Joseph Humeyer, told me about them. And I did a little research, and I thought, okay, this is not going to be good, because Venezuela was exporting, I think 8 million people have left Venezuela under Chavez and Maduro. And they're kicking out lots of ones that they don't want to have around because either they're opponents or criminals or whatever. We've only taken probably 1 million plus. A lot of them are in Colombia and other countries, but still among the million are many members of this gang. It was formed, give or take, a decade ago, we think, in the Tucaron prison. They are very violent. They deal in drugs. They do extortion. They pimp out, young women. They do all of the kind of rotten things that gangs do and organized crime does. I wouldn't call them terrorists because they're not, linked to the state. They're not trying to overthrow the United States. They're just trying to take over, networks of crime and make money. So they came in over the southern border. In many cases, they were caught, meaning like they encountered the Border Patrol and then they were released. and told, hey, show up at an immigration hearing in 6 months, whatever, a year. Some of them were paroled in under this special Biden program: Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. 30,000 a month from those 4 countries. Basically, they were allowed to schedule their appointment to enter the country illegally, and then they were given this status called parole, which is not really a status. It's sort of a, you're allowed in, but not in any really legal capacity other than we're not going to deport you. I mean, I've written a lot about parole. It was designed for very specific circumstances for very few people, case by case, a couple hundred a year, and it was used in a really egregious way under this administration to let in, like 1.5 million people. And they've gone to, they took over apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado. They basically went back to doing what they were doing in Venezuela, which is organized crime. We've found them now in New York City. There was the murder of the college student in Georgia, Laken Riley, was by someone who reportedly was either a member or associated with the gang, as was his brother. There have been cases in San Antonio, in Dallas, in El Paso. So it is creeping. And I think there was a report in Fox News recently that was referencing a Homeland Security report. So it's now a well-known phenomenon that has disseminated itself through the country faster than any other gang that I recall. I mean, we know about MS-13, and there's other foreign and homemade gangs, but this one, thanks to the policies at the border, has been able to get large numbers of soldiers, let's call them, of active members in an incredibly short time, and they've been very busy. And everything from smash and grab jewelry store robberies to petty theft, cell phone theft rings, pimping, and unfortunately murder and violent crime.
Well, it's a rather extraordinary situation. What would you say that the Trump administration needs to do to kind of kick in and really move the ball forward? Because, I mean, I'm in Houston, Texas. The advantage that we have here is that the police will actually shoot people if they don't cooperate being arrested. And we've just had a election, including a local election, where every Democrat judge who had a Republican opponent, the Republican was elected. I think we have 12 new Republican judges. They were specifically elected on stop the violence, stop releasing criminals back out to do more violence. So is that what we need elsewhere?
Yeah, I hope that if these guys think that they can get away with what they were doing in Venezuela in Texas, they're going to be sadly mistaken. And that's essentially all that's needed is law enforcement. We've had these prosecutors in our big cities from New York to San Francisco that don't prosecute. They were elected with money from left-wing groups on, sort of social justice, alternatives to punishment kind of ideology. They don't want to put criminals in jail. So you have these no bail policies where you can't have cash bail because that's discriminatory against people who can't afford it. And they're releasing people, criminals, time and time again out onto the streets. So we need essentially law enforcement at the national level and at the local level. That's what will take care of Tren de Aragua. First of all, stop the flow at the border, reinstate remain in Mexico. The supply will dry up when they're all forced to wait in Mexico for their entire process to come through. We need to finish building a wall or some kind of barrier across the length of the border so that people are channeled to ports of entry and places where they can be properly, I wouldn't say properly vetted because that's still not going to be possible, but better than they're doing in the field right now before they release them. We need to stop releasing them until we know who they are, until we actually know what criminal record they have. And if we can't find that out, maybe we should strongly consider not letting them in at all. And then if they are here, if they've been able to get in on parole, on release pending their removal hearings, whatever their status is, they should be fully accountable for their actions. There shouldn't be a special status just because you're an illegal immigrant. If I drive down the street and I get pulled over by a cop for speeding and I'm drunk, they will punish me. They'll put me in jail maybe, or fine me, or take my car away, or whatever. If you have no insurance, no legal status, no license plate, and they just let you go, what's the deterrent? There isn't one. So we have to take that person and do to him what they would do to you and me, except if they are here illegally, they should also have the removal process take place at the end of the criminal process. And, one by one, case by case, the word will get out and we will reestablish the rule of law. But I would say that's what we've lost in the last 4 years. We've lost it in our cities and we've lost it at the border. And I think the political consequences you just described and the national election that we had have shown that people's patience has run out and they're fed up and they want the government and law enforcement to do its job.
Well, Simon Heninson, it has been terrific to get a chance to meet you and share some of your thoughts with our audience. And again, you are distributed. Your articles have been distributed through the Heritage Foundation, and we encourage people to look you up there. How can our audience get more information about you and the Heritage Foundation?
Well, heritage.org is probably the fastest place to go. I put my articles out on Twitter or X I'm at WatchfulWaiter1, and you can just Google me and the articles all come up. I have a column that I put out every week. I just did one this morning called The Borderline, and you can also Google that. It's always immigration, border related stories, changing week to week, and I've tackled Tren de Aragua at least 3 times now, unfortunately.
Yes, I understand. Well, what a value to our the country and to the United States, and we certainly appreciate it. 4 separate suits were filed on Inauguration Day to stop DOGE. The key issues here are that unions of the federal employees want to protect their cushy jobs despite the enormous and growing federal deficit. The first suit was brought by Public Citizen, State Democracy Defenders Fund, and the American Federation of Government Employees. No surprise there. A suit was brought by the Center for Biological Diversity, apparently harassing Trump over the climate change hoax. The third one was brought by national security counselors. Their slogan is shining a light into the corners of the national security community and helping those who live there. Given Trump's promise of full transparency, this might just be reinforcing the Trump plan anyway. Number 4 was brought by the American Public Health Association, American Federation of Teachers, a commie operation in my opinion, Minority Veterans of America, Vote Vets Action Fund, the Center for Auto Safety, Citizens' Responsibility, and Ethics in Washington. The suit attempts to block DOGE on the basis that the gravy train for some of these groups will be cut off. I do want to note that I'm a lifetime supporter of vets. However, even there, just about every federal agency is failing at its job, while costing ridiculous amounts of our hard-earned money. And of course, all the feds can borrow on top of our hard-earned money. Time to get things running a little bit better. So let's see if we can make things provide better services, but spend less money. What a unique concept. That's what we have to do in the private sector, folks.
Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau announces his resignation. The world went crazy when Trump took on Canada, Mexico, Panama, and Greenland in just a couple weeks. In fairness, Trudeau was a goner before Trump took office, with ratings among Canadians below the dismal rankings of Biden. I have strong ties to Canada, and even the liberal-leaning people I know were done with this failure. Still, it was interesting that he did visit Trump before resigning, and I do not expect Canada to give up its nation status.
Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.